On today's Locked On NBA Game Night podcast, Summer League has begun. What's the biggest takeaways from day number one, and who's the winner and loser of the NBA offseason?
When that final buzzer rings, you know it's time for Locked On NBA Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. It's the true NBA fans' one stop for all the action. Every game, every night. It's Locked On NBA Game Night. Tipping off now.
It is Locked On NBA Game Night. I'm your host, Rylan, Stiles, host of Locked On Thunder. That's Gavin, Schall, host of Locked On NBA Game Night here on Saturday and host of Locked On Knicks. And we're here to talk about the NBA Summer League getting started with day number one of the California Classic and the Salt Lake City circuit. So there's a lot to discuss on the court, but there's also still off-season measures to talk about with the winners and the losers of the NBA off-season. But Gavin, we got basketball back. It was just a short hiatus without it, but now we're into Summer League. How do you just observe Summer League, understanding kind of the nuance that goes into it?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that you don't want to take too seriously. Like I always give this caveat. I feel like everyone who talks about Summer League gives this caveat. Like you see Josh Selby winning MVP. You see Jalen Brunson playing terribly. I thought Kevin Knox was a future All-Star after Summer League. You don't want to look too far into it. We're going to touch on this a little bit later, but I do think it's more concerning when guys who have a couple years under their belt come out and really struggle. And for the rookies, I think you're looking more so for traits. Certainly, if you believed in a guy and they were a top 5 pick and they look really good, it's going to confirm what you already thought. Like there's a lot of confirmation bias going on. We can get into it, but VJ Edgecombe might be a good case of that on night one.
Yeah, I think that's the perfectly put aspect of this is that for the NBA in general, you should not be a box score watcher, but for Summer League specifically, you've got to not necessarily look at what the box score displayed. Maybe it was an inefficient scoring night, but those traits really pop, like athleticism, like ability to turn the corner and get to the rim, whereas the finished product might not be there, but the finished product for a lot of these guys isn't supposed to be there. Summer League rosters are typically made up of these rookies who have a bright future, who could develop into something, also flameouts who are trying to get back into the league, and then obvious G League guys. So that hodgepodge group leads itself to sometimes messy production, but is the process right? And in day number one, let's start with Salt Lake City, which I thought was the better of the two options here of the 4 games. Whose process, whose game stood out to you in Salt Lake City with the Grizzlies, the Thunder, the Sixers, and the Jazz?
Yeah, so I want to start off with that Philly-Utah game, just because there was you occasionally get those games where it could be teams that were recently tanking or just draft particularly well. Maybe the latter for Utah, or sorry, the former for Utah, the latter for Philly. But I thought there were just a lot of intriguing names in this one. And man, did VJ Edgecombe absolutely shine. 13-27, really 13-25, missed two late desperation threes in that game. 28 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, and he was someone I was incredibly curious about. I broadcast some of his games in high school. I've been following his career for a long time. Just always been a monster athlete. And you looked at what he did on the Bahamian national team last summer. We're on a team with Eric Gordon, Buddy Hield, DeAndre Ayton. He was pretty clearly the best guy on that team. And then what he did at Baylor, a team that just did not have a ton of shooting and had a bunch of guards, and it wasn't a great fit. It didn't look very good, but you almost just wanted to believe in the traits of someone who's clearly driven, someone who's skilled, and someone who's just an extraordinary athlete. And his first bucket as a Sixer was him dribbling it up, going across the lane, floating through the air, and just finishing at this insane angle. And it was basically a flying half hook, high off the backboard. That was nuts. What was really encouraging to me was how he got into his mid-range game. At one point in a little 2-man game with Johnny Broome, got to his spot on the baseline and just rose up for a pull-up pop over Walter Clayton Jr. Had another one in the second half where he had this hard stop, head and shoulder fake, bring the ball around the world. Defender flies by, he drains the midi. Those were sort of the areas on top of his pull-up 3, which he was 1 for 7 from distance. So maybe your mileage may vary on that a little bit more. But man, I thought that was probably the part of his game I had the most questions about coming to the NBA, and just how confident and polished he would be as a scorer. And man, Rylan, I thought he just looked fantastic in that respect.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that this game kind of shows and illustrates what we're talking about, where VJ Edgecombe, I think, played really well. I think that Ace Bailey did too, though. But Ace Bailey's box score is super messy. Only 8 points with 23% shooting from the floor, 1 for 5 from three. And I thought that he did a really good job of keeping himself alive on plays, being active off the ball and putting himself in position to score. But the limited guard play, especially in the terms of facilitation for Utah's backcourt in this roster makeup, made it really hard for him to capitalize on those opportunities. They also, it felt like went away from him in the second half a bit too much, didn't look his way enough in the second half on those cuts and opportunities to where he didn't necessarily have the opportunity to put up monster numbers, but he did have those traits where you can see the vision of what Ace Bailey can turn into. So between Ace Bailey, between VJ Edgecombe, like this was a very fun game to watch. Ends up going to Utah 93-89 on their somewhat home court. They were playing at Utah University, but obviously like the entire crowd was on their side. And speaking of the crowd, very lackluster crowd for the neutral game between the Grizzlies and the Thunder, where the Thunder got their first look at the number 12 overall pick, Nikola Topic. And I thought the Topic, all things considered, looked really well. I mean, you cannot replicate game speed. You cannot replicate what true live action looks like in your rehab process. So clearly there was opportunities where you can see him on the bench, like gasping at times because he's just trying to work his way back into high level shape. But when you're looking at what he can do on the ball, it really does let you see why the Thunder are so high on him, because his ability to one dribble, he's already into the paint and he can spray it out to an open shooter. Well, those guys couldn't necessarily knock it down at a high clip with the guys that he had around him tonight. The way that the offense kept moving when he was on the ball shows you how he could fill a need for OKC with a half-court offense that got more than stagnant at times in the NBA playoffs and almost slowed to a crawl, almost was their downfall en route to a championship. So Topic's ability to play the passing lanes and get to the rim were two things that I think really highlighted his night in his debut.
Yeah, he was awesome for the Grizzlies. Like Jalen Wells, we'll get into it more in just a sec again, but like just someone who looks too good to be on this level, like an NBA starter. Didn't have an amazing day shooting the ball, but 3 for 8 from three, gets the line 7 times, makes all of them. I mean, at one point, I think it was Topic, like just pressuring him up the court and forcing a turnover. Yep. He was outstanding. Gigi Jackson is someone I'm a fan of. Obviously, like at one point was the number 1 player in his class, just an extraordinary talent. Like I think it's really encouraging because, man, like for a guy who, even when he was playing well as a rookie, was extremely raw, just to like have to come back midseason on a Memphis team that obviously eventually fired Taylor Jenkins, that was like battling for position in just a brutal Western Conference. That is just so hard to find your game in that setting, and he barely got time to find his game. So I'm really happy that he has like an opportunity like this where there's very little pressure, where he's going to be a focal point, where he gets up 15 shots in 28 minutes, scores an efficient 20 points. Like I think what we saw from him and what we'll continue to see from him is going to be really encouraging. And then Cam Spencer, just an A+ shooter, maybe someone who could fill Luke Kennard's shoes for them, if at least in the non-Ty Jerome minutes. 14 points, 5 assists, another really nice showing from Memphis.
I think that this was a boring game in all the right ways for Memphis and Oklahoma City. Like Jalen Wells and AJ Mitchell each looked way too good to play in Summer League. Their respective returners who were rookies that played high impact roles for their respective clubs before they each suffered injuries in their first season, to where they picked up right where they left off as high impact guys that really contribute in all the right ways on the floor. And you don't really need to see much from either side. It would not shock me if this is the only Summer League game that both those guys play in. Gigi Jackson looked like the best athlete on the floor. The Thunder second-round pick, Brooks Barnhizer, was the player that you hyped him up as. It's just gritty, hard-nosed defender who just vacuums up rebounds and allows you to start the break even with a more swingman frame than you would think of as a big man. So that the Thunder getting to play their traditional style of having a small ball 5, having a big forward start the actions in a way with Brooks Barnhizer. And then we talked about Topic, who I think it was great for him to get some opportunities against Jalen Wells. While they weren't all clean, well, it did lead to some turnovers. That's the stuff that you are not always promised in Summer League, is going up against defenders of that ilk and really testing yourself in these games for a guy in Topic who has not played in over a year and needs that experience. So it was kind of a ho-hum game. The Grizzlies end up winning it in lopsided fashion. But I think that in terms of goals that you set out to accomplish today, each side accomplished theirs.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, just because I wanted to chat him out as well, like Ace Bailey, like I do think like the really encouraging thing that you see there is just how much cleaner it looks for him at time with NBA spacing. Like obviously what he had at Rutgers was less than ideal, would be putting it lightly. And watching him just like curl off a screen into like an elbow jumper, and you just see how smoothly he moves at his size. Like that is, I think, scary for the rest of the NBA, even on a day where he didn't have a good game. And you see him settling for stuff. Like at one point got an offensive rebound and immediately goes into a Dirk fade. And he's going to learn, like at his size with his athleticism, to just go right up and attack the basket and make sure you get a foul. Did like have a similarly just fantastic defensive play to what we saw from VJ Edgecombe in terms of just flashing athleticism, where he chased down, I think it might have been Walter Clayton Jr. across the lane and just like was behind on the play and just rose up, extended like Giannis style alien swat. That was ridiculous. So if I were a Jazz fan, and again, you just saw the box score, you just saw the highlights, like I would not be discouraged. And then Bryce Sensabaugh, I think, is the perfect example of a guy who, same as Jalen Wells, same as AJ Mitchell, third year, like I think it is really urgent. Like it is a 5-alarm fire if you are not dominating Summer League, and he comes out and scores 16 points on 6-9 shooting in his first 11 minutes and just got red hot at one point, like dusting Justin Edwards with a step back three, then hitting like a trailing off balance, leaning 26-footer. Like the dude was like low key an efficiency monster last year, 46% from the field, 42% from three, 89% from the foul line, 11 points per game. I think he is an underrated piece in the Jazz's rebuild. And when that team is back in the playoffs, I think he will be in the rotation for them whenever that eventually comes.
Coming up, let's wrap up Summer League talk and dive into the winners and losers from the NBA offseason. But first, I want to say right now, but good friends over at Game Time, go check out Game Time today, because we've all been there. We're just looking around, trying to log on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, and you lose your spot to the show that you're just dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping for those memories. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time, it makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, so you can save up to 60% off of their killer last minute deals for your show that you are just dying to see. Their zone deals pick you the best seats in the sections that you want for you. They also have the panoramic seat view from your seat, which is great for concerts, because sometimes you've been to a venue before, but you don't exactly know how do they set up for concerts, where's the stage at, so you can get a view from your seat and understand what's going to happen at that concert. With Game Time, and the prices that you see is the price that you pay. There are no hidden fees. So if you're worried about plans that could change, Game Time guarantees that you has your back with the cancellation protections and more. So you take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time by downloading the Game Time app, creating your account, and using code LOCKEDONNBA. That's $20 off your first purchase whenever you have the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Go download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. What time is it? Game Time. We're back on the Locked On NBA Game Night podcast. I'm Rylan Stiles. That's Gavin, Schall, host of Locked On Knicks. I'm host of Locked On Thunder. For your next listen, go check out Locked On Jazz, what they think of the debut of Ace Bailey and these young pieces from their rebuild. Let's wrap up Summer League talk, Gavin, with what we've already hinted at. In the California circuit, it was kind of a day of disappointment, I guess you could say, from second-year players like Dalton Connect, like Khalil Ware, and that even lingered into Salt Lake City, where like Cody Williams does not have some standout game as a guy who really needs to start building momentum toward his career. Do the alarm bells ever start sounding, like especially for guys like Connect, guys like Cody Williams who had a high and low rookie season?
I think probably a little more so for someone like Cody Williams versus Connect, who did get substantial minutes at times in a highly competitive situation, where Cody Williams came out last year and just looked extremely, extremely raw and not quite ready for the physicality of the NBA. And the biggest thing that stood out to me for him in a negative sense was just like, to your point on not box score watching, like, do these guys get to their spots? Do they get easy shots? And if not now, then when, right? Like if you can't be at the very least, like, dominate either with physicality, skill, or IQ at this level, and at the very least say, I'm getting the looks I want consistently, which I didn't really see from Cody Williams in this game. Like, I do think that's encouraging in contrast to someone like Kyle Filipowski or Bryce Sensabaugh, who, I mean, for Filipowski, like, did have an awesome rookie year, like, does seem like the best Jazz pick out of these last couple of cycles. And he comes out there, looks like he's in the best shape of his life, and like, and just a couple different times bulldozes his way to the basket on the other side of the ball. Like Adem Bona in his second season, like he had a great rip through and drive for a dunk, and a couple of moments, even on Filipowski, where he was physically overwhelming. And when you don't see that, like, it does start to set off some alarm bells. But again, you don't want to be too judgmental of one game. You don't want to be too judgmental, like, just because the team context is often so poor in these situations where you don't have a guard who can, like, initiate and beat ball pressure a lot of times. Like, you're not totally running a coherent offense because you just came together a couple days before this started. So you want to give some grace, but you certainly can see some warning signs.
Yeah, I think that of all the people who quote unquote struggled today, like the biggest one is Cody Williams. You're 100% right, because of what happened his rookie season and what happened tonight. Was just like, tonight wasn't necessarily bad luck, it was bad processing. And that's what you really worry about for a guy who has displayed that consistently now for over a season, after being a McDonald's All-American, after being considered for being a top 5 pick in his draft, and ends up going to Utah later on in the top 15. So I just think that with Cody, it's not necessarily like doom and gloom forever, but you kind of think of it as the way you think about coaching searches and coaching hires, of like hot seats. Like, it's a hot seat for Cody Williams. You want to see him turn the corner as the summer league progresses and as these games start to unfold, however many more that he has left in him this season, because second year guys typically only play 2, 3, 4 summer league games, and your hope is that the less they play, the better, because it allows you to quote unquote graduate them, like we talked about with AJ Mitchell, and we talked about with Jalen Wells, of being just too good to play them continuously in this setting. And you hope that Cody Williams can have a loud game and get to that point as well before this team goes on to Vegas. But speaking of being loud, the offseason was loud, Gavin. And the offseason happens in a hurry. Like, we had the holiday on Friday. Perhaps your work schedule was all turned upside down. Give us a down low, Gavin. Who's your big winner of the offseason so far?
I think it has to be the Houston Rockets, and we'll hit on the Atlanta Hawks and Denver Nuggets, because I think it is absolutely a close conversation, but a team that just was struggled to score the basketball at times in the playoffs. I mentioned this stat last week, but anyone who missed it, you go from one of the least efficient high volume shooters in the league to one of the historically most. Out of 52 players who took at least 15 shots last year, KD was 4th in effective field goal percentage in the NBA. Jalen Green was 47th. And I go back, Rylan, I don't know if you remember, I believe it was both of us. We did the post game on this. February 6th, they lose to the Minnesota Timberwolves 127-114. Anthony Edwards scores 41 points, 16 in the fourth quarter on just a barrage of threes. And someone asked Ime Udoka, like, after the game, why'd you guys lose? And he said, look, it's nice to have a special player that can get buckets at the end of a game. And the Rockets absolutely have that guy now in Kevin Durant. I think there's still some lingering questions there, but the way they were able to supplement that by, thanks to some foolishness, Rob Pelinka, able to sneak in Dorian Finney-Smith, just loaded with flexible wings, and DFS, like the first of that group, unless you want to consider Jabari Smith Jr. a wing, like the first of that group that can really shoot. So I think that is a major addition for a team that at times it felt very, very cramped for them on the offensive end of the floor. You get Clint Capela for some insurance, and maybe, like, if they still want to swing like a big move for, I don't know, Giannis Antetokounmpo, if things are going bad in Milwaukee, gives them a little bit more leeway to trade someone like Alperen Şengün. I just think the Rockets have been brilliantly managed for about 5 years now under Rafael Stone, and this offseason was sort of the cherry on top of that.
Yeah, you hit the highest notes. And to me, the highest notes isn't even Kevin Durant, which kind of goes without saying, of how great of a trade that was, how great of an addition that was. And also, like, this Rockets team has proven to be able to win in the regular season. So you would expect that they can massage Kevin's minutes to where they can get him to the end of it all and playing him in the most meaningful games. So aside from Kevin Durant, I think that their two biggest wins was they pulled off all the necessary moves to improve their team from a year ago. It feels like all their holes from a year ago have been filled, while still having the powder dry to continue to add to this roster at the trade deadline, to add to this roster next summer, whenever you find even more things that you need to patch up, because you're never going to build the exact perfect team. It's about having the resources to get you closer to that benchmark, and they have that. And then the Dorian Finney-Smith edition, I feel like, is getting shoot away by too many people. I know that he's not the A-level defender that he used to be, especially at the point of attack, but in this Rockets system with their defense and their scheme, he's not going to have to be the guy to go take on the number 1 or even number 2 option on the other team. So you can kind of use him in a more off-ball role, which I think will rise the level of his defense and level of play whenever you can kind of protect him as a guy who is, again, now your 3rd or 4th best defender on the floor in a given lineup. And him being your 3rd or 4th best defender on the floor is exceptional. Him being your very only good defender on the floor sometimes can get spotty, and even then sometimes can have success. So I think that Dorian Finney-Smith, on top of that, he hits 45% from 3 in the corner. And like, he's the perfect, play finisher for this offense that you don't have to play through, but you can just get it to him and make him have the right play to keep the offense in a groove, and also puts points on the scoreboard in that capacity. So I do think that that's a massive addition for Houston, and a big reason why that they have won the offseason. Let's talk Atlanta though now. Let's go to the East. Atlanta Hawks. I mean, it feels like everything that they touched this offseason turned to gold.
Yeah, I thought spectacular summer for them. To me, what they've done the last 2 years, and interestingly enough, transitioning general managers in that time, Landry Fields out, I believe it's Onsai Sala in, I think just a masterclass in, one, taking advantage of a wide open East, taking advantage of a consistently dumb organization in the New Orleans Pelicans, first to get Dyson Daniels and picks back in that trade, and then a year later say, hey, you know what? We will also take your unprotected 2026 first that could end up resulting in a generational talent based on what we see in next year's draft. So that was honestly probably the move of the offseason, the one that will not impact next year's team. That is about as good of a draft day trade in the moment as I have ever seen. And I think this was a team that was completely directionless 2 years ago. We were talking, Rylan, last episode about teams like Miami, Toronto, the aforementioned Pelicans that are just not going anywhere. And the Hawks over 2 years, have a very clear-cut direction, a young team, like a decently healthy pick situation because of that trade with New Orleans. And I think outside of just bringing in multiple stars, this is just like the template of how to build around a flawed superstar, right? You insulate Trae Young defensively, right? You say, all right, we have Jalen Johnson. Let's add Zach Reshape in the draft. Let's add Dyson Daniels, who now profiles as one of the best couple perimeter defenders in the NBA. Let's add another fantastic rim protector when healthy in Kristaps Porzingis, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, one of the better perimeter defenders in the league. And then on top of that, all those guys can shoot. KP is just going to be obviously you lose some of Trae's lob passing ability, which is a shame with Edgecombe, because that's one of the best lob pairings in the NBA, and Trae is brilliant at that. But instead you have a new element where KP can space, and you can play 5 out over someone who is just too quick to be guarded with an open lane one-on-one. They're going to probably have a starting lineup of Trae, Nah, Dyson, Jalen Johnson, and KP. That is deadly. Onyeka immediately becomes one of the best backup centers in the NBA. Rishache could obviously could take another step forward. You had Luke Kennard, even more firepower off the bench. Really the only questions for me at this point is how healthy is Kristaps Porzingis dealing with that post-viral illness. That obviously is a major, major X factor, just like it was for the Boston Celtics, because similar to Boston, I think he elevates them from a good team to a team that can make and compete in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then there are some depth questions, right? They're very strong top 8. Beyond that, you don't really know who the 9th, 10th, and 11th guys are. But you know what? That's first world problems. They are in such a good position that I never could have imagined when I thought this team was lost in the wilderness a year or two ago.
Yeah, I think that what the Hawks have done this offseason has been stellar. Like you mentioned, truly building around Trae Young, a guy that has been to the East Finals before, and now with the East being wide open and surrounded by this new look team where he has a ton of defenders to back him up on that side of the floor. And those defenders are not liabilities offensively either. They, in fact, fit his skill set perfectly, even down to Kristaps Porzingis, who isn't the exact lob threat that you would want. But as you mentioned, the new element could be just a faster pace that the Hawks can play with now, and using KP as a trailer whenever he's healthy to knock down threes behind a play on top of putting pressure at the rim on the fast break. And it's not just like the new additions, but you mentioned that Johnson getting healthy is big time because he was on an all-star trajectory before he got hurt in the East. Him being healthy is almost an addition in and of itself for this next season for Atlanta. And they're going to have a lot of fun talking about how that's going to go down in the Eastern Conference. So go check out Locked On Hawks for all of that discussion. And my last winner, Gavin, the Denver Nuggets. I think that they too have had a flawless offseason, turning Michael Porter Jr. into Cam Johnson. The worst thing you can say about this trade, if you want to be the biggest skeptic in the world, you would say it's a wash. It's the exact same caliber of production. Okay, but it opened up the door to save you a lot more money and go continuously improve this roster. You have Durant Holmes coming back just in case that JV is actually going to go overseas. We don't quite know yet how that's working out. Mark Steiner reported today that they're still working to try to have JV as the backup center. And if JV is the backup center in the regular season for Denver, that's huge in terms of getting them through the 82-game marathon. Clearly, he has some postseason limitations. I'm not trying to say that Jonas is the reason why that the Nuggets will win a championship, but if he helps you get along in this regular season while giving you time to develop Durant Holmes, then you automatically have a better backup for the limited minutes that Jokic will be off the floor in the playoffs. So it's like a perfect pairing there. I think that Bruce coming back to Denver is huge, and I know that he won't be a one-to-one carbon copy of what he was for that title team, but we talk all the time about role players needing comfortability, and that role players need kind of that safety blanket of the spacing of playing off of great players, et cetera, and yet we're going to cast this move aside. Like, yes, Bruce has not been the player that he once was, but quickly he will be back to that level, playing alongside Jokic. I feel like, and playing in an organization that he's comfortable in and that's playing winning basketball, I think is huge for him. So I do think that move is a big one. And then whatever you get from Tim Hardaway Jr., it's just awesome. I will say the Tim Hardaway Jr. move is the only move that doesn't necessarily like engage me a ton, but I think that with the way that the rotation can be set, it can be used as a net benefit and not really cost you anything in terms of if he's not playing well, then just don't play him.
Yeah, I think our biggest lesson from the postseason on the Nuggets is just the extraordinarily high floor you have with Nikola Jokic and to a slightly lesser degree, Jamal Murray. I mean, with Aaron Gordon like playing hurt late in that series, obviously Michael Porter Jr. was basically useless out there, right? With one arm, and yet they dragged the Thunder, the eventual NBA champions, to 7 games somehow, and this just gives them a little bit more margin for error. And you like, for people who want to say that trade was a wash, I think Cam Johnson just a little bit more reliable than Michael Porter Jr. But
Yeah.
two, like how there was just an undeniable Jokic bump at this point, right? We see what happens with Russ when he joins the Nuggets. We see what happens with Aaron Gordon when he joins the Nuggets. To your point, we see what happens to KCP and Bruce Brown himself when they leave the Denver Nuggets. Like, I'd be shocked if Cam Johnson did not have a career season this year, at least from an efficiency standpoint. I think he will undeniably be better for playing this offense, playing this context, and this Nuggets team that just limped to the finish line a little bit, not a little bit, like a lot of it a year ago, just has so much more lineup flexibility. Like, that was a key point our friends over at Locked On Nuggets were making, that just the different configurations they can get to your point, like just buying some innings in the regular season. I think Tim Hardaway Jr., who had some really important stretches for the Pistons in the playoffs, like in a reduced role, just still like an absolutely elite shooter at times. I think he'll be key for them. Take some pressure off Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson, to your point, Durant Holmes. So when I was high on a year ago, maybe by playoff time, he can be a little bit interesting for them. I think they're in a fantastic position to maybe even on top of Houston, be Oklahoma City's biggest threat in the West.
They're in a great spot, but it was not all great this offseason. There are some losers to get to coming up. We're back on the Locked On NBA Game Night podcast. I'm Rylan Stiles. That's Gavin Schall. We're hosting Locked On NBA Game Night every Saturday night. Of course, this is every single day talking NBA hoops. For your next listen, go check out Locked On Nuggets because we just raved about them. So hear from the horse's mouth, what's the plan in Denver? But Gavin, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. There were 3 massive winners that we discussed, but who are the losers of the NBA offseason so far this summer?
Yeah, so we're nice guys, so we'll be a little bit shorter on this, but I'm just going to say both ends of the Miles Turner trade and not trade free agency signing. For the Milwaukee Bucks, I think the Damian Lillard stretch is something you do if you're going to be a title contender. Right now, I would have them, maybe different minds would disagree, as the sixth best team in the Eastern Conference. Obviously, you are dangling a carrot in front of Giannis, and I would be stunned. I think it'd be malpractice if they did not have some backdoor agreement with Giannis saying, hey, we'll make this move and we'll sacrifice our future, but you need to commit to us for at least the length of your contract. So I would assume that probably happened. We'll see if that holds up. I think this dooms you to never win another title with Giannis. Like we see teams like the Celtics, like the Pacers, right? Back-to-back NBA Finals team. One won a title, one came within a game of winning a title, blow up their teams because of the salary cap. And now for the next 5 years, you have $20 million that you can't make use of. I don't see, like when teams are already so handicapped by the aprons, Rylan, I don't see how you build a title contender that way. There are counterpoints to it. Like obviously, like Kyle Kuzma's money comes off. They have a couple firsts they can trade this summer. You need a stretch five next to Giannis, and Turner's just a perfect Brook Lopez replacement. He's a younger guy who can survive defensively a little bit more. So it's a great fit. They should be solid next year. I don't get it in terms of long-term thinking. And then for the Pacers, again, like it gives them some flexibility. Maybe they found a cheap, interesting replacement in Jay Huff, but man, just incredibly tough to stomach, right? Coming off a championship, you're a game away from a title, and you trade away your longest tenured player who's somewhere between your third or fifth most important piece on that team that just got to game 7 in the finals. And we just talked about it last week, Ryan. I feel like stretch fives are the skeleton key to being a championship contender in the modern NBA. It is a cheat code. You get rim protection on one end, you get spacing on the other. And Tyrese Halliburton, who obviously is exceptionally slippery, but is not an elite north-south athlete, I think he needs as much margin for error and as much space as possible to maximize his game. Obviously, Jay Huff could potentially step up and provide some of that. This is a big loss. You're talking about one of the best shooting centers in NBA history, Miles Turner. So I think both ends of that are quite tough.
I think that, everything you said is spot on. And with the Pacers, the most disheartening part is that you understood the plan, but you don't understand the execution. I mean, you listen to Locked On Pacers this week and how caught off guard that Tony was by this move, and rightfully so, because I get it. If you want to cut cost on the margins because you have a season now coming up where you're going to be without Tyrese Halliburton, like this is not how you do it. Like you want Turner in place for the next year when Halliburton's back and you have the gang back together of a team that just went to consecutive East finals and went to the NBA finals this year and fell in game 7 to the Thunder because of that Halliburton injury. Like, that you could sell yourself on being that close, even more close than just a normal game 7 loss because you played most of game 7 without your best player. So I just did not think that this was the way that you make moves to duck any sort of luxury tax or duck any aprons, etc. from Indiana. And then we talked about it last week. My big loser is New Orleans. It's because my big thing when evaluating these moves is just like I believe every front office knows more about basketball than we're ever going to know. But can I feel and see your plan? Do I know what you're attempting to do? And I don't even know what the Pelicans are trying to conjure up with that roster. I just don't. I think that Derek Queen, for example, making that trade that we talked about with Atlanta, it was so good for the Hawks. Being on the wrong side of that trade value chart for a guy in Derek Queen who is interesting, who I think has great talent, and I'm a big fan of Derek Queen individually, but the caveat with Derek Queen, the entire draft process was his talent is undeniable, but the fit is very unique. And you've got to really watch how you build a team and a lineup around Derek Queen to maximize his skill set. And I cannot think of a worse front court to put around Derek Queen to maximize his skill set than what's happening in New Orleans. So like the big move is a move that I can't get behind, not even because of Derek Queen. I think he's catching a little bit too much of the heat because of what's happening around him in New Orleans, because everyone knew of sort of his guardrails that were going to have to be in place for him to reach that level in the NBA. So I just don't get what New Orleans is doing.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with you. I don't think they're a coherent team. I said it last week. I think they're going to be one of the worst defense in the NBA. And man, they better hope and pray that they do not get lucky in the lottery if they miss the playoffs and give the Atlanta Hawks a top 5 pick, because that is one that will go down in infamy.
Giving away that pick in a loaded draft class, like a absolutely star-studded draft class, not a draft class where we're like, it could be good, it could be fun, because like every year around this time, there is a level of optimism around the upcoming NBA draft. But this year, like the 26 class, you can just rattle off 5 guys that you think are going to be stellar. You have the BYU product, you have the Kansas guy, you have boozers, you have everything that you would need in this draft class to have a lot of fun with a top pick. And now you're hoping to not grant Atlanta that top pick, but what else is there? Like when you're trying to map out Pelicans outcomes this season, what else is there than gifting Atlanta a great pick? I just do not see it for New Orleans with this offseason. But Gavin, this was a lot of fun as always. Go check out Locked On Knicks for more Gavin Schall. Check out Locked On Thunder for myself. And until next time, be good and be good to one another.